Hello and welcome on Frenchly for our webinar, Paris Property Unlocked, Structuring Cross-Border Ownership, Navigating Property Use Rights, and Maximizing Financial and Personal Returns. What an interesting topic. Only you, Miranda, could come up with something this sharp. Bonjour, Miranda.
Hi.
Our French audience already knows Miranda, U.S. attorney and real estate expert with more than 20 years of experience in real estate investments, transactions, and life on multiple continents. She will help us understand how cross-border rules affect U.S. and international buyers and why certain standard planning structures can create serious tax exposure in France. Thanks to you, Miranda, we are opening a new window on one of the most misunderstood aspects of Paris real estate. In the City of Lights, an apartment is never defined only by its location or its square meters. Its legal classification shapes everything from whether you can rent it short term to the income it can generate, to the taxes you will face in France, in the US also. In many cases, it even determines the property's true market value. To guide us through this landscape, I'd like to introduce Maître Clarisse Josse. Bonjour, Clarisse.
Bonjour, Frankie. Hi, everyone.
Notaire and expert in French property law, Clarisse's deep experience includes cross-border estate planning for Anglophone private clients and advisors. Today, she will be sharing her knowledge in real estate transactions and how legal status impacts both ownership and succession. We will also be joined a little later by Rudy Citruc, director partner at Pick a Flat, and an expert in short and medium term rentals. His 20 years of experience bring unique insights into market returns, regulatory realities, and investor strategies in the Paris rental market. Over the next hour, you will gain a clear view of which properties truly unlock income opportunities, how legal classification influences valuation and yields, and how sophisticated investors structure ownership to optimize taxation, protect assets, and plan efficient wealth transfer across borders. I invite, as you know, our audience to ask questions during this presentation, and I will be honored to ask them on your behalf to our experts. Ladies, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frankie. Hi, Clarisse.
Hi, Miranda.
Well, I'm so excited. I feel like we get so many questions that really only a notaire should answer. And so I'm really excited for this webinar because I think we can cover a lot of ground, a lot of issues that our clients get into and get worried about all the time. So really excited to have you here with me.
Yeah.
I guess let's just start. Yeah, thanks for coming. I guess let's start with kind of what is a notaire? This is my first slide. What is a notaire, Clarisse? Help us understand just a little bit the context of what your role is in real estate and more generally in France.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for asking this question because actually in France, the notaire holds a very specific positions. They've been notaire in France since the Middle Ages, actually. And I know that there are no notaires in the US. Sometimes it can be a bit confusing working with a notaire. We are neither a public notary nor an attorney. We are a public officers appointed by the state, but we don't work for the state. We work on its behalf. And because of that, the deed we draft and sign have the same value as a court decision. We have a monopoly over certain key legal areas, just like real estate transactions we'll talk about later, mortgage, estate settlements. Our fees are strictly regulated. We collect the tax just like inheritance tax tax or capital gain tax. And most important, especially if you buy or sell a property in France, you do not need, like it happens in the US, an insurance, for example, a title insurance, because actually your insurance is the notaire. Our liability is unlimited for any mistake we could do in the draft of our deeds. So what we say in France is that actually anyone living in France will once in their lifetime meet a notaire. So when they buy, sell, or die, get married, or have a baby. So yeah, that's
So it's interesting for me because one of the things I love is that the database of all real estate transactions is a central database in France. And what I've understood is comparatively to the US, there's 1/100th the number of real estate lawsuits in France that there are in the
really
US,
low.
really because of this centralized information and the sort of controlled and managed contract
Yes.
world around real estate with notaire.
Yeah.
So I see it as a huge advantage, especially as a realtor also in California, where a lot of the structure of the transaction, there are not we don't have lawyers that get involved. We don't have anything that kind of involves the people besides the realtors, and so we take a lot of that responsibility. Oh,
Mm.
hey, Rudy, I think your camera's on. Maybe you want to turn it off.
Sorry.
Um,
Okay.
that's okay. See you soon. Um, so I guess I really want to delve into this area of structure. You know, we work a lot with buyers in Paris, and we get a lot of questions around how they should buy structure. And one of the things that's come up over and over the years is buying a property with a U.S. trust. I think when I first started in Paris real estate 20 years ago, the word was you cannot buy with a US trust. Don't do it. You can't do it. You're going to be penalized. It's not recognized in France. I'm giving you all the kind of statements I've had around it. So that is evolving, right? And yeah,
Yes, it is
tell
evolving.
us everything. Tell us everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it has evolved. I mean, we're catching up. No, that's an interesting question because in France we have a real ambivalent relationship with trust. They're still viewed with a lot of suspicions connected to fraudulent activities and money laundering, even if I mean on the French perspective, I know that on the US perspective is not that at all. Um, we see it more and more actually in France, and as I said, it's ambivalent in the way that on one side, foreign trusts are recognized and valued in France, but on the other side, it's not possible to set up a trust in France. So,
So when you
because of
say
that.
they're recognized, you mean you recognized a foreign trust. It's how you view a foreign trust, a US trust, for example.
Yes, exactly. And this is why when a French resident has assets into a trust, you should declare them to, or you should declare the trust to the authorities, for example. Or, for example, if you transfer assets into a testamentary trust, and if the succession is governed by the U.S. law, then we as a notaire responsible for settling the estate, for example, we should apply the U.S. law, and we should also give credit to the trust and to the power of the trustees. But the real issue here in France is that a trust has no legal entity. So it cannot be registered as it in the land registry. So meaning that um, you cannot buy, a trust cannot be the owner of a property in France. A trust cannot be a a shareholder or a partner of a French SCI in France. So, which is a real issue. So, in this situation, it should be, of course, always plan ahead. There is never just one solution. But if you've got an American client or even a British client, for example, who really want to invest through his trust, what we could do is, I think the easiest way would be just to invest through an American LLC. LLC, and the LLC would be held by the trust. Then an LLC is fully recognized and it has a legal entity, so it can buy property in France. And then what you need to do is anticipate with your local U.S. lawyer and a tax advisor in France what would be the tax consequences in France to invest through an American LLC. But usually that's the situation when you buy a property. And the other thing is when you haven't anticipated and you have transferred assets into a testamentary trust, for example, that's the real issue, because then we have to do with this situation, and then we must adapt, and we must adapt it to a French legal concept, which could be close to what we know of the trust. So then it will depend on each situation. And it can be, in this situation, it can be really tricky, especially if the beneficiaries of the trust don't get along together, or if they disagree with the trustees, what can happen sometimes, unfortunately. So
in that case, you would have the trust, and then you would have another layer of ownership. Is that kind of what you'd have an LLC that broadly was the owner vis-a-vis the French government? The LLC was the owner, and the trust was a member of the LLC, or was it?
Exactly.
And that would kind of avoid the sort of, and I see it as when you say they don't recognize, or they don't have a similar structure, what happens if is it just a notaire would look at a trust and say, I'm not going to let this trust buy this property. I'm not going to register the trust as the owner.
Actually, I just can't. Yeah, that's the thing, because a trust has no legal entity in France, so it can't be registered. Even if I tried, then the land registry would say, it's not possible. It has no legal entity, so it's a no. It's not the right word. It's not possible.
It's an impossibility.
Impossibility. What we can do is to adapt, and by adapting, for example, especially in a testamentary trust situation, what we can do with the land registry is just to register the beneficiaries as the owners, and to note also the powers of the trustees. And that meaning that, for example, if one beneficiary wants to sell the property, then any notaire who will ask the land registry a copy of the property record will see that there's a trust, and that the powers of the trustees are recognized, and then he can sell it on his own. But it really depends on its situation. What I just could say to clients living in a common law system is just please contact us in advance and anticipate this situation. Yes.
Okay, so it's no longer the word that a trust isn't possible. It just requires a little bit of forethought, how you want to have it, what you're trying to achieve, I guess, through the trust is also important, and how you can get that your goals recognized by French law versus, an actual recognition of the U.S. trust as the owner of the property. That fair to say. And actually, you mentioned SCI, and that's kind of the number 2 on our list. And that is a different kind of financial planning for clients, for buyers, in that you can have an SCI is a Société Civile Immobilière, if you'll allow me, and it's often used by a family that's buying a property together, or different individuals buying a property together, sort of laying out the ownership, the percentage ownership in the property, and kind of the shared usage of the property. And one of the things we've discussed that I found interesting and has worked for some of our clients is that the ownership, the percentage ownership in the SCI does not need to match the financial contribution of the parties into the SCI. Is that
in certain in certain proportion? Yeah, I mean, the structure should not be seen as artificial by the tax authorities, but yes, it's one interesting point that where. Okay, I'm going to give you a lawyer answer, which is there's always pros and cons for any structure or any plan. But what is very interesting with the SCI is the flexibility it offers to investors. When in France, if you want to buy a property, you can either buy it directly on direct, meaning that you are the owner and you're registered as it in the land registry, or you can buy it through a company, so a French company or a foreign company as we've seen it. And in any situation, there are pros and cons, as I said. But with the SAE, one of the main advantage, I would say, on a civil point of view, not on a tax point of view, is that you can split the ownership and from the control. For example, if you want to invest in France, you want to buy a property with your kids, they're young, or I don't know, you just want to keep control over your property, but still you want to transfer part of just for tax reasons, or just because you want them to benefit from this property too. If you buy this property directly with them, then you will lose the main part of you will lose the control of the property, because if you want to sell it, then you'll need the agreement of everyone. If you buy 99% of the property and your kid has 1%, still you will need his full agreement just to sell the property. Otherwise, you need to go to the judge, which is not the case if you invest through an SCI. You can be a shareholder, or you can even just be the manager of the company, or you can own shares in usufruct and the children in bear. Or anyway, we can be flexible, and through the SAE, you can keep full control over the property. You could sell as a manager, you could sell the property, you could buy any other assets, you could rent it out, etc. And this is what I think it's an interesting, what we say in French, vehicle, just to think about when you plan ahead and want to invest in France. But then sometimes the thing is, there's also downsides, if it's correct, with the SAE. Because just for example, we're going to talk about Airbnb and forest rental. The thing is, in France, an SAE is a transparent vehicle. And if you buy a property through an SAE and you use the property as your main residence, which is totally allowed, if you sell the property, then you can benefit from the full exemption on the gain. Which is interesting. But the thing is, if you rent if the SCI rents the property, even just for a day as a short-term rental, then on a tax perspective, the SCI won't be transparent anymore, and will be potentially it would be submitted to the corporate tax.
So it'll be treated like a commercial entity.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And in my example, in this situation, you would lose the full exemption for main residence. So
it's a potential house for co-ownership with other members of the family. Again, what I find interesting is that like you said, you have kind of the control, you have the shareholder, and then you have the financial contribution, and they don't necessarily have to match.
Yes.
If I say that correctly. So you can, in a sense, put the property together with your kids, and you put in all the money, and then the kids have a larger ownership share. And then if it becomes, it's an inheritance and estate tax situation, that there's a potential to transfer value through the SCI in that way, by having an imbalance between the finances and the ownership. Is that kind of fair to say? You could just nod if you don't want to agree with me. But that seems to be kind of an interesting piece. And again, I don't want to talk about these in the sense of this is what somebody should do. I think the important point is there are different options for people to choose from. And even this last one on the list, the kind of the gift strategies, again, what this concept you have in France, that there's the underlying ownership of the property, and then there's the enjoyment and use of the property, and that those are two separate rights in the property. So I can buy something with my kids and I can say they own it, they own the underlying asset, but I have the exclusive right of use for my lifetime. And then there's a calendar, there's sort of a schedule that determines what the percentage owner, sort of percentage value is of the underlying ownership and the usage depending on my age, right? It depends on
Right.
my age.
Yes.
So it allows you to kind of divide the interest in that way. Then when I pass away, my usage right disappears.
Disappears with you, actually. It dies with you.
And then there's no taxable gain on the underlying ownership for my usage right because it just expired. So even if my usage right was cataloged at 50% of the value of the property, that 50% just disappears when I disappear.
There's no, there won't be any inheritance tax on the
On that.
usufruct. Yeah, because the usufruct, as you said, disappears. Yeah, it's it's one of the main technique in France to anticipate the transmission and to lower the inheritance tax, which can be way higher than in the US.
Yeah.
Again, should be anticipated in France and in the US. It can have also consequences maybe in your state where you live on the capital gain and on inheritance tax. So check with a local lawyer.
Sure.
But in France, what I can say is we do it a lot. Okay, as you just explained, the property, the ownership can be split into the bare ownership and the usufruct. Is actually the bare ownership is the right to dispose of the property, and the usufruct is the right to use the property and the right to get the income of the property. When you transfer during your lifetime the bare ownership to your kids, the gift tax will be computed only on the value of the bare ownership that is transferred to your kids. And depending on your age at the date of the gift contracts, for example, it's just I don't decide what is the value. The value is set by, the authorities by the law. For example, if you are more than 51 years old and less than 61 years old, we value your usufruct as 50% of the property. So if you own a property which is worth, let's say, 100, if the bare ownership will be valued 50, so the gift tax will be calculated on 50 only. And the value of your usufruct, which is here 50, is not submitted to the tax. And during your lifetime, you can still enjoy the property. And when you die, as you said exactly, the usufruct will die with you, and your kids, in my example, will become the full owner of this property which value would maybe be at the date of your death, I don't know, 100 plus.
Right.
And
But no tax. Then there's no
no
inheritance
additional
tax.
tax, no additional inheritance tax, no
And
no capital, no gain tax too. Yes.
Yes. And I think that's the distinction that is most important. I think one of the interesting changes in the law, and it was EU wide, and I believe 2015, was that a US person could apply US inheritance law to their French property. And that requires a will, right? You do a will, you sign sort of a French will at the time of the purchase, applying US law to the property. But that doesn't apply US inheritance tax law. That's just a distribution. And so these strategies that you say are used often by French families become equally important for, non-resident families to consider when they're entering into the purchase for these same sort of these inheritance tax reasons. I mean, inheritance taxes in France are very different from the US. We have a much higher exclusion
Allowance. Yeah.
allowance about, I believe it's 14 or 15 million currently. And for
It's
the estate, but in
100,000
France,
euros in
it's
France.
right, 100,000 euros per
Okay.
child. Yeah.
Per parent and per child.
Per
So
parent per child. Yeah. So these, I kind of wanted to touch on these because I think it's an interesting area of value for buyers. I think one of the things too to emphasize, and this is something what you were saying to get in touch early with the notaire, is that in the US, like I can buy a property tomorrow in California, and then a year from now, I can move it into a US trust with no tax consequences. That is not the case in France. You can't do that change afterward. If I buy it and I make the change afterward, I'm paying taxes to do that, right? I'm paying stamp duties, notaire fees.
So if you own a property in France and you want to transfer it to your
Into an
children.
SCI. I bought it in my own name and now I
Oh,
want to put it in an SCI, or I want to put it into,
yeah.
right?
Yes,
That is
because
not a
in
tax-free event.
no, there's no tax-free events. Let's say. No, they are, but no, what's important to understand that in France, anytime you must change what's recorded in the land registry, there are potentially fees and tax to pay because when you change, if you transfer an assets into an SCI, then you're transferring the ownership of the assets to a company which has a legal entity which will become the official owner, and then you'll need to go and see a notaire who will draft the transfer. The transfer will be recorded with the land registry. Then you probably, depending on the cases, tax registry, tax with reimbursement tax. You will pay notaire fees, and potentially you can also pay capital gain tax. But it
If you
really
make
depends
that
on the
if you make
situation.
that transfer, if you make that transfer during the ownership. So then the key is you have to choose these things. You have to choose your structure at the time of the purchase. You can't
You must
logistically.
Yeah, you can change your mind, but you must think ahead. Because sometimes I've got clients who have bought a property through an SCI for all the good reasons we just talked about before. But at some point they say, we don't need the SCI, it's too much administration,
Right.
or it's not in Paris, for example, I'd like to run it as a short-term rental. But I don't want to be submitted to corporate tax, so I'd like to remove the property from the SCI, and we just, for financial reasons, can't do that. It's always possible for legal reasons, but sometimes it's just too much expensive.
So, and I
And
think that's the key is that from a planning, it's just structure ahead of the closing. I think you said something great. There's no such thing as a tax-free event in France. I'm going to remember that one.
yeah, which is
Um,
not really true. So they are, because the devil is in the detail,
yeah,
So
no.
we don't always look for it. But what I do want to say too is that in that situation, this is what I really like law too, because there's always solution, there's always alternatives or sub solutions. They're not always perfect, but we can play with the legal issues, and we can always try to find a solution. Uh, but yeah, always better to just to think ahead.
Yeah, to think ahead and make the planning at the time that you're buying. And you mentioned short-term rentals, and I want to shift into that discussion as well. And I'm going to just advance my slide. Because this comes up a lot, especially with our non-resident clients who are going to be using their property, maybe not full-time, want to do some rentals, short-term, Airbnb style rentals or longer term rentals. So I kind of, and we will talk with Rudy more about kind of where to find value, what kind of properties really work. But I'd like you to help us understand a little bit about the use of the property, the legal status, the permitting. Tell us first, I guess, about, tell us about this use and destination a little bit, this world of what you're allowed to do with the property. And I guess from the notaire perspective, this is what you see when somebody comes to you and says, I want to buy this property. They come to you and there's a particular status already part of the property. I guess the question comes around, what transfers to the new owner, what doesn't transfer to the new owner, and sort of your process for evaluating that.
Yeah, and that's another issue, just to think ahead, especially if you want to invest in Paris. As I explained before, the ownership in France is composed of the right of disposal, the right to get the income, and the right to use your property. But this right of use is not totally free. And it's regulated by the laws. And since the 2024 Act, the French state has transferred more powers to the cities to regulate this status of the property, this use. Because as you probably know, there is a housing shortage in Paris and in big cities in France. And this is why it's important to understand that when you buy, for example, a residential property in Paris, this residential property has a residential use. So meaning that, for example, if you want to rent it out for a few days as I don't know, a tourist furnished accommodation, must be aware that this activity is considered as commercial activity. And if you have bought a residential property, the use of this property is housing, while Airbnb is a commercial use. So if you want to do it, that means that you need to change the legal use of your property. So you must convert the residential use into commercial use. And this is where the trouble can start with
the Airbnb. And I just want to say most apartments in Paris are residential, purely residential properties. So the basic nut of it is short-term rentals are not legal in a residential designated property, with the exception of your primary residence, which they've allowed up to 90 days a year of short-term rentals. So if it's your primary residence, you're a French resident, you pay taxes in France, you declare yourself a French resident, not like it's your primary residence when you're in France, but it's actually your primary residence. You can rent it up to 90 days, short-term rentals per year.
Yeah, but you need to check. So, yeah, and in this situation, if it's your main residence, as you explained, you don't need to ask for a real change of use to the city of Paris, but you still need to check with the co-ownership. Because in France, when you buy a condominium unit, it's what we call the lot de copropriété, and then the building is managed by the co-ownership, and there is a co-ownership rules. And more and more, I mean, pretty frequently now, the co-ownership don't want Airbnb's activities anymore, accommodation anymore, so they tend to forbid it and in the co-ownership rules. So you need to just to check that in advance. That's what a notaire is supposed to do. If you buy a property in France and you say it's going to be my main residence, but I'd like to rent it out for a couple of days or a couple of weeks each year as short-term rental. As a notaire, I'm responsible to check that for you.
To check the rules of the building and make sure that you're
Yes.
actually going to be allowed to do that. So that, and that is for the classic. So if I'm not going to become a French resident and I want to do Airbnb, my property designation has to be commercial, correct? But it's not just that. I still need a permit to do the short-term rentals. And as I know it, those aren't, the city of Paris is not giving those away anymore. In central Paris, let's say. In central.
Yeah, it's very difficult because if just to give you an example, you have just bought a residential property, so just an apartment, just to make it clear, and the use of this apartment is presumed as it's a housing. Then you will need in this situation, so the formal approval of the co-ownership, as we said, but you also need from the city of Paris two other authorizations, as you said. First, a real change of use with compensation, meaning that if you want to convert a residential property into commercial use, you need to compensate by converting commercial use into housing. And
it's a 2-to-1. It's a 2-to-1. Like if I want to convert 100 square meters,
it depends where.
It depends where.
It
Okay.
depends where. If it's central Paris, it's 2 for 1, so you convert 2 for 1. If it's not central Paris, it's 1 for 1. If you convert for housing, for social housing, is 1 for 1. And compensation, there's two solutions for compensation. The first one is you're lucky enough to own a commercial property, and you can ask for its conversion, or you don't own a commercial property, and then you can try to buy what I call housing credits. Is in French we say commercialité. So what is commercialité? It's social housing companies build affordable building in Paris, for example, and in return, the city of Paris give them housing credits they can sell on the market, and you can buy these housing credits, but it's really it's pretty expensive. If you just check online on the website of the city of Paris, they show a map with the price, and for example, Central Paris is about 3,000 euros per square meter. A square meter is about
So,
10.76 square foot.
so that means if I have to buy 3,000 euros per square meter, but I need to buy 2 for 1, then for every square meter of my apartment I'm converting, I'm paying 6,000
Yeah,
euros
yeah,
extra just to
yes.
get the commercial status. But now once I have the commercial status, I still don't have the right to rent short term. I
No, because you
still
need
need the permit. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. This is what we called changement de destination. So it's a change of destination. So it's an urban planning permit, but you're totally right. So for example, so the Airbnb, the use is it's a commercial use, and the destination would be hotel. So you also need this permit too, and then only if you get the real change of use and the change of destination, you are allowed to register and run your property as short-term rentals. If you do it illegally, then you risk a fine of up to 100,000 euros.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's real and illegally, I think Airbnb must have tens of thousands of illegal. I mean, there's so many
Not
properties on
anymore, I
Airbnb.
think. I'm not that sure.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know exactly because I don't do it in myself. But what I do
Yeah.
understand that you must record it. You need a number, and then the city of Paris can check. And
Well,
but
I've heard people just literally fake numbers on Airbnb. Like they just
oh
Airbnb just says, give me a permit number, and they just make up a
oh
permanent number.
oh, you know more than me. I do. Okay.
I don't think Airbnb really checks it, but who knows? Suffice it to say, all you need is your neighbor not liking that you have people coming in every 3 days, and they report you. And that,
Yeah,
that does happen in Paris. And you risk, like you said, fines up to 100,000 euros. So it's probably not worth the risk. Um,
exactly.
and I guess, so but if you find a property with a short-term rental permit, what I love is that the permit travels with the property. It travels to the new owner. And so what that means is, again, coming to you as the notaire and saying, listen, I think I'm buying a property with a short-term rental permit. That is going to be the use I want. Please verify that for me. That's really important. That's important that that process goes through with you and that you're really seeing and verifying, yes, you do have that usage right.
Yeah,
Um,
right. If you
and then so
yeah
so if you don't have that and you want to rent, you do have these other options that are on here. One is called bimobilité, and I believe that is often misused term. That what people really mean is by code civil. And correct me if I'm wrong. The bimobilité is very expressly for rental to students. So, let's say 9-month rentals to students, or a rental to a company who is then bringing executives, let's say, in and out of that apartment over time. But it is not, when you rent to a tourist in a classic sense, it is not by mobilité. That is sort of a misused term. What they
yeah.
really mean is this by code civil. So can you tell us a little bit kind of what is needed for that status in Paris? And that again is, renting out for 30 days or more. So it's not a short term. It's kind of a medium term rental. What is the area? What is what do people need to know about that?
Okay, so maybe Rudy will talk better about me about all the different kind of rental contracts. But what I can say is that when you invest in a property in France, it's important just to understand that there are several kind of rental contracts, and some of them give very strong legal protection to the tenants. So that should be planned ahead too. And if you can run your property as short-term rental, and if you think about something else, then you have different kind of leases. You have this main residence lease, furnished, unfurnished. The unfurnished main residence lease gives a very strong protection to the tenants, a bit less if it's furnished. And the buy mobility, as you said, might be a good option too, but it's not for the tenants must be a student or a trainee, and it's 1 to 10 months, and it's not renewable. You cannot ask for a deposit, but I do remind. Then the buy code civil could be an interesting option, but not for every situation. What I do understand, the buy code civil could apply in any situation that you should not apply, or that the tenant is not benefits from another status. For example, if you have an individual who wants to rent your property as its main residence, then you cannot. I don't think you can
Use the
sign
buy
to buy.
code civil.
Yeah, you could.
But so
So
it's
for
really, but so if you want to rent, if you want to use it sometimes and rent it sometimes, and you're ready to go into that month plus rental, the buy code civil can apply for a normal residential apartment. Like you can have a normal residential status. I see Rudy nodding his head. So you can have a normal residential status and use that. And again, all of this comes down to you checking beforehand what is important for the client, what are they planning to do with the property, and will that property sort of meet those expectations, and figuring that out, before they've committed to buy.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, Rudy, you're on the call, so tell us
Yeah,
if we've said anything wrong about buy code civil. I
no,
guess.
it's almost everything was perfect. Now,
Almost.
Almost.
no, as you said before, right now, and unfortunately, it became very complicated to make more short-term rental in Paris, like Airbnb, legal Airbnb during the whole year. So what we doing now a lot is making investing people in residential real estate and make midterm rental. And what actually you were right, Miranda, saying that we can't use buy mobility because my buy mobility is very how do you say réglementé, Miranda.
It's very regulated.
It's
Yeah.
very regulated,
Yeah.
okay? And actually, that's why we use the buy code civil, because the buy code civil is more a contract between two people and not a real estate contract, actually. So that's why. And what is true is that we use it only as a secondary residency. So that's why we usually rent it to people from a company. Usually we oftenly sign a lease with a contract with company who send people for work, for mission for 30, 60 days. The rent are a minimum of 30 days, and it gives us the opportunity to have a better rent, to not be locked with a tenant for a long time, which is one of the most important thing in France, because as Clarisse said earlier, is that the regular lease in France are really too much protecting the tenants.
Yeah.
And as soon
Very
as
strong tenant protections. Yeah.
exactly, so there is two very important thing in this kind of lease, is that you are not locked with the tenants. You can make more money because we are not in a regulated rent, Okay, you have to know that in Paris now, since now 2017, we have a regulation of the rent. Okay,
Rent
you can't
control.
rent.
Yeah.
Rent control, yes, thank you. Rent control. So you can't give the rent that you want. So that's, thank you to put this information now on this slide. Is that for this example, for this apartment that you can see, this apartment is in the second district of Paris, so in the center. The city give you the opportunity to rent it up to 40 euro per square meter. Okay.
So the rent control, you mean the rent control price for this apartment would be about 40 euros per square
Yeah,
meter. That's what's
exactly.
regulated by the city. And in this occupancy code civil, what are you making instead of 40? What are you making?
We are making much more. We can make up to 60 right now. Actually, that's the number I gave you. We
Yeah.
are making that right now on this one something like 61 euro per square meter. Okay,
So
which
if you
is
look
much.
at so if we look at these numbers, and just to explain, you've had 5 different rental periods for over 30 days.
Yes,
The owner has actually used this apartment for 3 weeks at some point in
e-
between. So the owner is still able to kind of slot themselves in when they
exactly.
come to Paris. You've had full occupancy because you've been very successful with this apartment, but the expectation is more 85% occupancy.
Exactly.
And so,
What is important? Yes, that's
yeah,
true. Very important. Fortunately, on this one, we launched it in April, and since then we had like a multiple rental who have been made with almost no turnover. And in the turnover, actually, the owner used it, so it
yeah,
was like 100%. But usually we have some turnover during the year. So usually we expect to have about 85% of occupancy
occupancy.
during the whole year, because there is for example, this kind of rental are not working really well during the holiday session of the end of the year. So during Christmas
January.
and New Year's Eve. During the summer in August, because people are not coming for work in Paris during this period and everything. So there is few period during the year where it's more complicated to rent. That's why I prefer to talk about 85% of occupation.
But this, what's nice is you rent it, you're getting what
Exactly.
is about a 20% bonus over full-time rental rates, and you can use it. So it's not,
Exactly.
you don't lose the use of the property. So this is available to any residential owner.
Yeah.
Are there areas of Paris or, that you prefer that do better, that have better rentals?
Anyway, it's always better in the center of Paris. So I would say from the first to the 11, it's always better.
Okay.
But except like the 18 and 19 and 20 years arrondissement, I would say I would say all
Anywhere.
over Paris is good. Yeah.
And then I just want to switch us quick, and I want to leave time for questions too, because this is another option. This is actually a client we did together. My
Yeah.
client bought your short-term rental property that you represented, and this is all very, very new. And again, you can't find these permits everywhere, but you've been working with owners of legal short-term rentals for a while. So we were able to find an apartment that worked really well for our client. This is in the 18th arrondissement, but it has the
Mhm.
short-term rental permit. And here we have kind of all the figures. I mean, she's had an incredible, over 9% net ROI since
Yeah.
launching this property in April. What
Because
is
this is a
unique?
pick a flat management. Because this is a pick a flat
Yeah, of
management.
course, because of the management of the amazing management company. Of course, that is clearly factored in. But what's interesting here is it's a ground floor apartment. One of the bedrooms is actually in the lower floor, in the
Yeah.
sous-sol, we call it. But it was, you could convert it into a 3-bedroom, 3-bath. It's rented exceptionally well. It's had 75% occupancy, and she's had an amazing return on her investment. And that, to me, what's unique about these properties is they end up being more like ground floor, former boutiques, properties that have had the commercial status that somebody had the foresight to get the short-term rental permit, and now are operating in this unique space of being legal short-term rentals. This one's had this return. And then, I wanted to share this one because this is another unique opportunity in the 7th arrondissement. And it's one lot, but it's actually two different apartments. So there's a 2-bed, 2-bath apartment, and there is a 1-bed, 1-bath, but they're one lot. They're being sold as one lot.
Yeah.
And it's also, a very successful property, and actually a return on investment that's in the 7% range. Also, because this is already operating as a short-term rental, so the seller,
It
the
is,
owner,
and more, yeah, also because it's more premium apartment as well.
right,
That's
right,
why you are in the very center of Paris, in the 7th arrondissement, which means, I mean, this is why you on the other end, it's a really good investment, the one on the 18, but because it is the 18 arrondissement, one of them it is on the ground floor, on the street, have a few different things that make the prices much more different.
yeah, sure. No, and location obviously is everything. And this is actually currently for sale. You currently
Mm.
have this for sale.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Um, well, this is great. I'd like to, I don't know, Frankie, if we have any questions out there for Clarisse or for Rudy. I'm glad to kind of I'm sure we could keep talking forever, but
Yes, we
if
do. Very
yeah,
interesting. We have questions for you guys.
yeah.
Um, from a US citizen here who owns an apartment in Paris and thinking about renting it out long term. So, with these different ownership options and tax implications, if I want to evaluate my options now, what is the next best step? Should I first talk to my agent or notaire in France? What should I do next?
You mean you already got an apartment in Paris?
That's what the person specifies. US citizen who owns already an apartment in Paris and thinking about renting it out long term.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you're just talking about the legal, not legal, but fiscal aspect, how do you say?
Financial.
On the
Tax.
tax aspect, yes, I would recommend to first talk about your with your notaire or
Advisor,
fiscalist.
tax
Yeah,
advisor.
financial advisor. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, if I can may. If you want, if you're not a French citizen and you want to invest in a property in France, and if you don't really know how you want to invest, the thing is, I think it's a teamwork. Uh, Maybe you should start with a tax advisor who could give you advice on your residencies and when you will become a French resident and the tax consequences it will have on you. And then when you will start really looking for a property to buy, then you will contact Miranda. And when you have finally find a property and maybe made an offer, at that point you can talk and contact a notaire. Usually this is what uh, clients do. Yeah.
So, but I
Question,
would think that if you're a
yeah.
US person who's going to stay a US person, my sense would be to kind of evaluate, do you really want to rent long term, long term? I mean, a classic unfurnished, apartment in Paris, or are you looking for kind of rental solutions in the style of, a by code civil, monthly rentals, and kind of understanding what your rights and responsibilities are going to be, is a good place to start. And either, Rudy doesn't do long-term unfurnished rentals, but maybe evaluating kind of what kind of return he could provide versus a classic, agent who does longer term rentals. So, yeah.
Question from Dorothy. I have an SCI in the fourth next to first, 2-bed, 1.5 bathroom. Will I require a change of destination to rent it out? I intend to use it 20-25% of the year, but rent it for the remainder. What do you recommend?
Well, that's the exact project that we talked about earlier on the Volney. which means this is a residential flat. Okay, so she can use it whenever she wants, and we can rent it for 30 days minimum period. So and we can make this kind of rent that we call mobility, which is not mobility because this is more a by code civil.
But Clarisse, you would say the SCI is a problem.
Ah,
Yes or no? I mean, but you're right to raise that question. If you want to rent it out through an SCI with a furnished rental contract, then if now your company is transparent, it could be it could change into a corporate tax company, which will have tremendous consequences on the tax. So that must be really planned ahead. Yes.
She just made a precision. I bought it, she said, as an SCI, it will be furnished. Does it make a difference?
No, what I do understand that she's a partner of an SCI who owns a property in the fourth arrondissement, and she wants to rent it out furnished.
Right.
So she just should check if the SCI is tax transparent or already submitted to the corporate tax. And in that situation, she just talk about it with an accountant or a tax advisor, a tax attorney.
Okay, what about fractional ownership? Is this a viable way to own?
I'll take that question. It is definitely a viable way to own it. It's not really, a fractional ownership is basically a co-owned property by a number of different owners. So it is still a residential property. There's no rental activity happening. It's just a multi-use of a property. The designation is still residential, and you're not doing any kind of rentals. I think that would trip you into a different category, but certainly the ability to do it rests under the umbrella of residential, and it just becomes a contract between the owners. SCIs often are owned by, a few members of a family, and then somebody passes away, and then it's inherited by new people. And SCI can be a large group of people who own it together. A fractional is sort of a similar structure that more defines the usage times of the different owners, but is still just a residential property. So it is, a viable and more popular option in Paris.
Two
Yep.
questions about Bail Code Civil. The first one from Kat. Bail Code Civil is a type of ownership you set up when you buy the apartment?
Clarisse, you want to
no,
take that
no,
one?
it's just a kind of rent. Just a kind of contract, actually, of a lease. Okay,
Okay.
it's not when you buy, you don't decide that you will make a code civil. You do whatever you want after you bought.
And Shannon asks, can SCI still utilize the Bail Code Civil for rentals, or is Bail Code Civil only available for direct purchase?
No, you can you can make a in so except if Clarisse say say that I'm wrong, but in my opinion, you can make by code civil whenever you want. It's
Rental
just about
contract.
sorry.
Yeah, just as Rudy explained, le bail code civil is a rental contract. It has nothing to do with the purchase or it's a rental contract. Yeah.
The only incident would be about I think the tax that you would pay regarding if you bought it with a company or you bought it under your name or whatever. So the difference would be about the taxes. But you can make a buy code civil whenever you want, even if you bought with a company, an SCI, with under your name directly or whatever.
Many American buyers assume US estate planning tools like revocable trust are universally compatible. Can you explain why these structures often trigger French tax liabilities and how investors should plan instead? I think that's for Miranda, this one, no?
No, not for me, for Clarisse.
Okay.
Okay.
Clarisse?
We just talked about it at the beginning. So on a legal perspective, trust is not a legal entity in France. So a trust cannot be the owner of a property in France because it cannot be recorded in the land registry. Then on a tax perspective, but I'm not a tax advisor, on a tax perspective, what I do understand is that if you are a French resident and you are the settler or the beneficiary of a U.S. trust, you should declare it to the authorities and you could be taxed on the income. And that if you don't declare just your trust, you can risk a 20,000 euros fine. So what I do recommend if you're a US citizen and you have a trust and you want to relocate in France, really plan that ahead and ask advice to a tax advisor, because it can have, again, tax consequences in France when you own a trust. Yeah.
And I think, Clarisse, one of the things you mentioned to me that I just wanted to say is you were talking about how the law and the reception of U.S. trusts in France is changing, that it's adapting, that there's more and
Yes.
more talk about, hey, we should recognize these. Maybe we should even have trusts in France.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
conversation's happening right now. Yeah.
Yeah, this is my personal dream. No,
Yeah.
no, really, I've been in this area for about 15 years now. And at the very beginning, I just remember when I heard about trust, or we just slammed the door, we
It's
should
like a
shut
dirty
the
word.
door. Dirty word, yeah. Money laundering, fraud. We don't want that here in France. It's not the case anymore, especially since 2015 and the European succession regulation, which allows a foreign law to apply to French estates and French real estate. So now it was a shock for us as a notaire to have to apply a foreign law on on French properties. And so we have to adapt. But what I can say too about notaires is that we know how to adapt, and we are catching up, as I said before, and we are receiving more and more training about trust. We are encouraged to understand trust, just like, for example, the last week I had two different trainings on U.S. trusts organized by the Chamber of the Notaire of Paris. And also among the scholars, the universities professors who are they are training us, and there's more and more lawyers and scholars who are asking just to change the law and to recognize the trust as a legal entity in France, which could make cross-border situation a bit more smoother. So I'm kind of positive for the future. Yeah.
Well, thank you for being on the forefront of that, because yeah, it's a big issue for American buyers, and it's nice
I
to hear
know.
that that's
Yeah.
evolving. So yeah. Yeah.
It's already been an hour, but can I keep our experts a few more minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
sure.
we might have lost Rudy, but
Unfortunately, I think I won't be able to stay more. I just arrived. But
thank you, Rudy.
I will be happy to answer all your questions after that one. If you need to send me an email or send me even give me a call, everybody is welcome to call me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rudy. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
For international buyers, what are the most common legal misunderstandings you see, especially concerning copropriété rules and urban planning restrictions?
My perspective is not that easy to answer because I don't know the regulation in the US. I see, maybe Miranda, you know that more because you really handled with this. What I can say as a notaire very quickly is that sometimes it's hard for, especially maybe Americans, just to understand that France is not the US. and our perspective or difference, especially with trusts. The other day, I heard a trustee say, but I'm officially the trustee and I have the full powers on this property. And I had to explain it to her that I'm sorry, but the property is located in France, so it's a bit more tricky. Culture shock, I do see on an everyday basis. Yeah, which is interesting, but I don't know for you, Miranda.
I would say from the perspective of like usage and co-ownership, I would say one of the first things that surprises a lot of people is how low the fees are for co-ownership fees in the US are significantly higher than they are in France. So it's a regulatory, it's a financial commitment that is much lower. That the co-ownership has, takes care of a lot of the usage and what's allowed. There are restrictions that come from the co-ownership rules versus there's also the layer of the city of Paris. There's actually a lot of different areas. You have the arrondissement in Paris that determines whether you're taxed as a habitation, as a residence, or as a commercial property, which might be different than the actual designation or real designation of the property. Those two things can be different. I think the thing that's hardest or sort of most challenging for Americans to get their head around, if they're not using it just as a classic residential property, that there's a lot of kind of moving parts, and there's not sort of one administration or one city council that's going to decide everything. That there's different objectives of the different arrondissements versus the city of Paris versus this country that kind of have to be sort of a multi-layered approach to figuring out, what you're allowed to do with the property and making sure that you don't run afoul of the rules. So, yeah.
Thank you. One last question, more general for you, Miranda. When an American family purchases a Paris apartment, what steps should they take immediately to align US and French reporting, tax treatment, and long-term ownership strategy?
So I guess, I would default back to what Clarisse was saying. I think the most important thing is to figure these things out as you're buying and to remember that once you've purchased in a particular entity or in a particular way, it can be very costly to change that afterwards. So it's a decision and a discussion that should be happening early on. Otherwise, if you're talking about the ownership, I mean, just the classic ownership of a residential property, you're investing in the property. Someday you're going to sell it. You're going to have capital gains tax on that. There is a tax treaty between the US and France. So whatever you pay in France is going to be credited against what you pay in the United States. By the way, France very strongly encourages long-term holding. You have no capital gains, zero capital gains after 21 years of ownership. You still have social charges that phase out until 30 years. But that's a gift that we don't get in the United States. You don't get that gift for long-term ownership. So it encourages long-term ownership. Paris encourages residential use. And anything in between, it's really about first understanding the tax treatment and the requirements in France, and then adding the layer of your US taxes. And one of the things I love about the work that Clarisse does, she works a lot with family offices and advisors and is really used to kind of providing them with the base information about what's going on in France and how things are going to be treated in France, and allowing, the US advisor to kind of add their advice on top of that. So I think that approach is really the best way to sort of understand the properties located in France. The rule of real estate is first you apply the local country rules. So that's the most important and the least familiar. And so it's the most important for Americans to get their head around first.
Is there a way to share on the screen how to contact you, Miranda, Clarisse, like a QR
Wouldn't that
code?
be nice if I had, well, let's see, I have a QR code to contact Paris Property Group. That's my company. But I absolutely, I think we're going to send out the recording to everybody, Frankie, and I'll make sure that you have Rudy's contact information and Clarisse's and everybody, yeah, that we're all on there.
So basically, we're gonna do it the other way around. I'm gonna send you, Miranda, the email, the name, first name of every attendees, and you promise me to send them your contact and more info. Can we do
I
that?
promise. I do
Are we
promise.
shaking hands on this? Okay.
Yes.
So the last word is from Hélène on the chat, and she says, excellent webinar on some very thorny issues that too many advisors avoid. Thank you all for your expertise. I
Oh,
couldn't say it better. Thank you so much, and thank you to all our
thank you.
viewers. The replay will be available on Frenchly.us within the next 24 hours. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you,
Clarisse.
Clarisse,
Thank you,
for
Miranda.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Miranda. Thank you very much, Frankie. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye.